Well, good morning. How many people are enjoying their service so far, enjoying this atmosphere of excitement and faith? Sometimes we just need to be reminded that God is more than enough. I know we believe it. I know most of us in this place have believed that for a while, but sometimes we just forget, don't we? We just forget. The situation just seems too big, and we forget how big God is. And so our hope as we begin this series, More Than Enough, that we all come to that realization, some maybe for another time, but others maybe for the first time, that God is bigger than the situation we find ourselves in. He's bigger than the moment of doubt and discouragement that we find ourselves, bigger than the seasons of death or disappointment that we find ourselves in. God is actually more than enough. So we recognize that we live in a tough world. John 16:33, it says that in this world you will have trouble. This is Jesus talking in the New Testament. He's saying, in this world you're going to have trouble. It's real encouraging, isn't it? It's like Jesus is supposed to encourage you. He says, in this world you're going to have trouble. In this world, you know, I'm just telling you right off the top, it's going to be hard. In this world, there's going to be days you're just going to want to quit. This world, there's going to be days where you want to give up. In this world, there's going to be days where you're going to be doubting. In this world, there's going to be days where you're going to be disappointed and discouraged. There's going to be days where you want to hang your head. There's going to be days where you want to throw it all in. Just so you know, there's going to be days where it's going to be tough. This world is tough. But then he says, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. He says, but don't worry about it, because I've gone before you. I've overcome the world. We can stand in that today. Church, we can stand in the fact that God has gone before us. And even though we face hard times, it's not the end. It's not the end of the story. It's just the season we're in. And so as we begin this series, we're going to understand that, yes, there's hard times, but how do we push through those hard times? How do we acknowledge that? So as we work through the book of Daniel, we're going to be stopping on these 4 moments, these 4 encounters, these 4 stories that we can pull stuff out where it seemed hopeless, it seemed all is lost, but yet God brought hope into a hopeless situation. See, the thing we need to understand before we move on is that even though this world is troubled, that God is still on the throne, that God still is in control, and that He has a plan, and that His thoughts for you are greater than we could ever dream or imagine. So we need to hold on to that as we begin this series together. So we're going to start today right at the very beginning of Daniel chapter 1. If you have your Bibles, I would encourage you to open them up to Daniel chapter 1. If you don't, we're going to have parts of it on the screen, but I'm just going to tell you a story of Daniel chapter 1. But I'd also want to encourage you to go home and read the whole book. It's not a very long book. You can read, it's very story-driven. But take some time and read it, as we're going to be talking about this. Pastor Bill's going to continue next week, in the next 3 weeks, as we talk about the fiery furnace and the lion's den, as we continue to pull out these stories that we've all maybe heard of, but get a fresh memory of what's going on in the context of the story. And so I'd encourage you that. But I want to tell you a story as we begin of Daniel chapter 1, where it all begins. And I want to kind of help lay a foundation as we continue to move through this series. Is that okay? So pretend you're in elementary school. Again, my kids are in grade 1, and so they all sit around on the carpet, and they read story time. So this is story time right now. And I'm going to get us all on the same page as far as what's actually happening. And then our goal is that we're going to pull out 3 principles that we can apply into our life. And as we leave this place, hopefully be able to take those first steps in knowing that God is more than enough. Is that all right? Is that all cool? We're just going to lay it all out. All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are really encouraging today. It's a great, self-esteem is through the roof up here, confidence. It's good. Anyway, so here it is. So we're going to start at verse 1 of chapter 1. Here's my paraphrased version mixed in with a little bit of the Message version, and it's just story time. So here it is. It was 605 BC, and the armies of the Babylonian Empire laid siege against the city of Jerusalem. For those of you who don't know what laid siege means, is they attacked, they took over. There was a big battle that took place, and the city fell. And the Babylonians, in their customary fashion, rounded up the best and the brightest among the citizens and the royalty of Jerusalem and marched them off to their capital city. Among their captives were 4 Hebrew boys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In addition to the native Babylonians, the city of Babylon was inhabited by scores of people from the surrounding region. King Nebuchadnezzar's intent was to transition those foreigners away from their native language and culture and indoctrinate them into the ways of Babylon. The king then ordered them to be served from the same menu as the royal table during their training, the best foods, the best wines that had first been offered to the gods of Babylon. And after 3 years of training, if they met all the expectations, if they passed all the tests, then they would be given positions in the king's court. But Daniel determined he would not defile himself by eating the king's food or drinking the wine. So he asked the head of the palace staff to exempt him from the royal diet. The head of the palace staff, by God's grace, liked Daniel, but he warned him, I'm afraid of what my master, the king, will do. For he is the one who assigned this diet. And if he sees that you are not as healthy as the rest, then he will surely have my head. But Daniel appealed to the steward, who had been assigned by the head of the palace staff to be in charge of them. Try us out for 10 days on a simple diet of vegetables and water, and then compare us with the young men who eat from the royal menu. Make your decision on the basis of what you see. The steward agreed to it and fed them vegetables and water for 10 days. And at the end of their 10 days, they looked better and more robust than all the others who had been eating from the royal menu. So the steward continued to exempt them from the royal menu of food and drink and serve them only vegetables. Over time, and by the providence of God, the Babylonians came to recognize that these 4 Jewish young men were extraordinary gifted leaders and administrators and were given places of leadership and influence among the Babylonian Empire. So that's chapter 1 in a nutshell of Daniel. But I want to kind of get into it a little bit. Sometimes what happens is because we're spanning a long period of time and we only have one little book to do it, we miss out on some of the nuances of what's actually happening. The author is not able to get into all the details, and so it's left to speculate and left to us to read a little bit between the lines. But here's a couple things I want to just reveal to you to help us paint the picture before we move forward. Daniel was a teenager. He was a young man. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were teenagers as well. Daniel was assumed to be part of the royal family, and his friends, his companions were of noble right. They were all well educated. They were all smart. They were all of noble birth. They were all teenagers at this time, and they were taken captive. Now, let's just push pause for a second. I don't know if anyone's ever seen movies like Braveheart or, name a bunch. They're all eluding me right now. But movies where there's been a kingdom goes into another kingdom and takes it over. Now, there's nothing pretty about it, is there? It's bloody. It is. There's confusion. There is uncertainty. People are being ripped from their families. Things are being burned. People are being killed. Kids are screaming. Women are being mistreated. It's brutal. There's a lot of bad things happening. This is not some pretty childlike story. This is not a Sunday school story here. If this was a movie, we probably wouldn't let our kids watch it. It is awful. They're being ripped from their homes. They're being captives. They're being ripped from their families. They're being ripped from their security. Everything they had known is being ripped apart from them. And then they had to make a 1,500-mile journey to Babylon. 1,500 miles. They didn't get on a plane or a car. They had to hike this thing out. They were being pulled behind as slaves. No, they're now being treated less than those who captured them. Forced away from their families and forced to serve in the king's service, the same king that conquered their land and killed their families and held them captive. See, as I unpack the story a little bit further, there's one thing that came out to me as I was reading it that made me really stop and think, and what we're going to talk about a little bit more today, is that the Bible says that these 4 were among many who were taken from Judah. They were among many who were taken captive. Now, the Bible, in Daniel, we only take record of the 4. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Only 4 stood up against Babylon. So only 4 stood up against the king. What happened to all the other ones? What happened to all the others who were trained in the same place, who were no doubt friends or acquaintances of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? What happened to them when they were held captive? Most likely, they just kind of put their head down and follow suit. So can you imagine Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're in this prisoner, they're held captive. Not only are they kind of going against the grain as far as what the king of Babylon was holding them to do, but in the cells during the week, during the nights, they're being harassed by their friends who are saying, why don't you just put your head down? Why are you bucking the system? Our old life is over. That is not who we are anymore. This is our new reality. Stop fighting the grain. You're making it hard on all of us. Just put your head down and follow suit. It's over. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were different. They saw it through a different lens. You see, it's important for us to understand this situation, that this was a bad place. They're in a bad situation. This is not some simple Sunday school story or fairy tale. This is real people whose lives got turned upside down. Now these 4 Hebrew boys, once freed, now turned slaves, are trying to figure out what's next, searching for some hope in a seemingly hopeless situation. I don't know if you're here this morning, you can relate. Maybe you're saying, I can understand those feelings. I can relate to those feelings of uncertainty and fear and worry and doubt. Unsure of where God is in the moment. We've all been there, haven't we? We've all been in these moments where we're unsure where God is, uncertain that God even cares or knows or is willing to do anything about it. I remember many times my wife and I in these seasons of uncertainty as we're trying to figure out where the next payment is going to come from for the next bill or the next mortgage payment, trying to rationalize our brain around why God would do this or allow this to happen in our family and take this life away from us while this is happening over here in somebody else's life and doesn't seem to make sense. See as our family is falling apart and why God would allow that to happen. After years of love, why is there no love anymore? Where is God in all this? We've all been in those seasons of life where we are uncertain of where God is, uncertain that He even has a plan. And those feelings are okay. It's okay to have those feelings. Those are natural feelings when you're in the moment, when you're faced with life's challenges and life's reality. When you understand the frailty of life and that it is not a perfect world, that we are in a broken world, and we embrace what Jesus said in John 16, that in this world you're going to have trouble, and you find yourself in that place of trouble, and you don't necessarily see how God is going to overcome yet. You're too lost in the fog. We've all been there. But the question I'm asking this morning, and the question I want to pull out of the text is this, is how do we turn those feelings around in the face of trouble to believe that God is actually big enough and more than enough? What made Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego different than all the others who were taken captive? They weren't the only four. If they were the only four, then we could just say, well, they were just different. It was just who they were. It was all the culture of their background. But no, they're among many who were taken, all of them the same background, all noble birth, all showing aptitude for learning. And they're all from good heritage, quality, quick to understand, and they're qualified. They were taken for a reason. All of them were taken because they were above the cut. They were better than the rest. But what made these four different than the others? And so that's what we're going to ask today, the question we're going to ask. And what can we learn from them in order to put into place in our life to help us navigate the challenging seasons as they come into our life? So that's what we're going to talk about today. The first principle is this, that I believe as I read the text, is that God is more than enough when we have had enough. God is more than enough when we have had enough. I love this in Daniel 1:8. It's the three verses that spoke most to me in this text. It says, but Daniel resolved. But Daniel resolved. I looked it up, Webster's dictionary. Daniel resolved. He made a firm decision. You see, Daniel is here. He's lost. He's confused. He's uncertain. He doesn't know what tomorrow is going to look like. He doesn't understand what the plan the king has for them. He knows that the king conquers kingdoms. He knows that the king is not a friendly man. He knows that he's the most powerful man in the known world at the time. He had nothing to gain by conquering or by challenging the king, but he came to this resolve that no matter what happens tomorrow, that no matter what happens next, God and I, we're okay. He came to that inner place, that inner peace, that he didn't know what happened. He didn't know what all was going on, but he came to that inner place, that quiet resolve where he trusted God. You see, it would have been easy for these guys to feel that God had forgotten them. It would have been easy and argumentally justifiable for them to just forget their old life and put their head down and follow the system. It would have been easy for them to just say, God, I guess you've abandoned us and now this is our new reality and we're just going to follow through with it and we're going to try to save our life as best as we can because you have forgotten about us. You have left us. You left us over there. You allowed for this to happen. You allowed for our families to be killed. You allowed for our kingdom to be conquered. You allowed all this to happen. So obviously you've forgotten about us, so now I'm going to forget about you. It would have been easy for them for that to happen. In fact, all the others did. All the others did. It would have been understandable for them to compromise along with the others in disguise of self-preservation and personal advancement. It would have been easy. But here's the reality of this story. This story is not about food. This story is not about whether they chose to eat from the royal table or not chose to eat from the royal table. This story is about their resolve to stay faithful and obedient in their darkest hour. And their story is about in the lowest moments when they had enough, when they didn't know what to do, they allowed God to be more than enough. It started with that quiet inward resolve, but Daniel resolved. He came to that firm decision. See, it's interesting. We talk about food, and some of us in our culture today, we don't really understand why he wouldn't eat the food from the king's table. Just let me help you paint that picture a little bit. Is that the king offered them food because it was the food that they had offered to the gods of Babylon. The king only ate the best foods, and they offered the best foods to the gods of Babylon. And then after that, the king and his entourage and his royal family would all eat from that food. And because they were training these slaves to be served the king's service, he wanted to treat them like they were part of his service. So he gave them the best foods and the best wines for them to eat. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel, even if only a part of the meat was offered to a god, they didn't want to eat it because they didn't want to break the vows that they had made to God as Hebrew boys to God. And so regardless of the cost, they would not defile themselves by eating the food dedicated to a false god. And so what seemed like foolishness to the official guard who oversaw them didn't make sense to him. He didn't fathom that, couldn't understand it. That God actually turned it into an opportunity for his glory and his power to be revealed. See, it's important to understand, again, as I read the text, it's really fun, actually. If you don't read the Bible, it's really fun to read it and just allow yourself to just kind of hang out in the text a little bit. Don't just roll over it, but just read it a few times. There's some really cool things that come out. Another thing that I was thinking about with this was at the beginning. There's a miracle that took place, and sometimes we see the miracle as the end of the story. The miracle is kind of the happy ending to the end of the story. Like there was tragedy, there was opposition, and then all of a sudden there was a miracle, and it's the end of the story. Everyone lives happy ever after. This is the beginning of their story. They had still 3 years of vegetables and water. Now just pause for a moment. Let's think about that. No meat. Not even a hot dog. I don't know if that's meat, but no meat, nothing. They're eating vegetables every day. Every day, water and vegetables. Can you imagine? I just want to imagine. I'm kind of weird this way. I like to imagine the conversations that happen between Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. What'd you have for dinner today? Vegetables. Oh, wow, me too. Oh, what do you have? I wonder if they actually dreamed about meat. I wonder if they dreamed about something other than broccoli. I wonder if they dreamed about, God, maybe one day this will happen. But here's what I love about this story, is that every day as they're eating vegetables and drinking water, they're reminded that God is with them. Because they were healthy, they were strong, they were physically appealing, they looked good, they didn't look like they were being malnourished. So every day as they're eating vegetables and water, God is saying, I'm with you. I'm with you. I haven't left you. Every day they're reminded through this 3-year journey that God has never left their side. Can you imagine? This is that process. We don't imagine. When we want God to show up, we want God to show up now, and we want everything to be better. But in this story, God shows up and it's still bad. God reveals himself, but he doesn't actually take them out of the situation. He just reveals himself in the situation. He says, I got you, I'm with you, but you're still in it. And we have a hard time processing that, don't we? We say, well, God, if you're with me, take me out of it. Don't leave me in here. Why would a good God, a loving God, allow me to stay in here? But he had a plan. And he was reminding them every day that he was there. I remember the very first time that I had to come to this resolve in my life. I mean, like many of you here, I grew up in a faith-based home where Jesus was the center of our house. We grew up going to church, and my mom was in the ministry. My uncles have been going in the ministry. It's just kind of what we did as a family. And I remember everything was good until my 18th year. And I remember it was the first time I was hit in the face with the reality of our broken world. First time I was hit in the face with that. Our leaders that serve the church and pastors are human too, and they make mistakes, and they break trust, and they sometimes hurt us. And I remember this reality, and as it was hit me square in the face, and for the season about 1.5 years, my family was broken. I remember it. I remember it being very vivid, where everything that we knew about church, everything we knew about faith, everything we knew about God and the service, and it just kind of started going backwards and started getting inside out and started getting foggy and unclear. And I remember I had been called to ministry. I knew that God wanted me to go to Bible college. I just never thought that. But in this moment, I was 18 years old. I remember just all coming to an end. And I had to come to that place of resolve inside of me that said, God, I don't understand all this, and I don't understand what you're doing. And I know that what they do doesn't reflect who you are. And so, God, I'm making a decision on what happens next. Me and you are okay. Me and you are okay. Remember that resolve. I just remembered that was the moment. I gave my life to the Lord when I was 4 years old, but I honestly believe that was the real moment when I just said, God, me and you are okay no matter what happens next. I also remember on April 24th, 2004, I stood on an altar similar to this with my wife, Wendy, and I looked her in the eye and I said, for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I made a commitment, an inner resolve to say, I'm going to love you forever. I had no freaking clue what I meant. I had no idea what I was saying. I didn't know. I had no idea what the next years of our life would look like. And anybody who's married after 5 years, you understand that. When you say those vows, you have no idea what you're actually saying. You're just saying it because the minister's telling you to say it. But you do mean it. There's part of you that means it, but you have no understanding what that actually means. And then you hit your first rocky, your first hill, you hit your first battle. And then it starts, okay, this is what it means. You see them the next morning. You're like, what the? That's Wendy looking at me. That's not me. You just find yourself in these moments where you're like, what is this? But you come to that quiet resolve. It says, no matter what happens next, no matter what happens, how good time or the bad time, me and you, we're okay. We're okay. I don't understand it all the time, but we're okay. And so Daniel came to this quiet resolve, this inner resolve that said, God, no matter what that King Nebuchadnezzar throws at us, no matter what he does to us, no matter what happens to us, God, me and you, we're okay. And I love that, this inner resolve. So the first step is coming to that place of resolve, this inner peace that comes in trust with, despite what you see in front of you, despite how you feel in the moment, despite the potential consequences. It starts with that inner choice, that inner resolve. And here's that choice. We've all been given a choice. We've all been given that choice. It may not be an easy choice, but it's a choice that we all been given. And that's a choice no one can force that choice on you. No one can force you into that inner resolve. That's something you have to come to on your very own, that inner resolve. The second is this, is that character isn't developed in Babylon. It's only revealed and refined. See, character isn't developed in the season of uncertainty. It's only revealed and refined. Character isn't developed in the season of doubt or the season of death or the season of disappointment. It's only revealed and refined. See, life is a series of choices that you are today. You are who you are today because of the decisions and the choices you made yesterday or a year ago. And most of us don't fully understand how important these small choices actually can be. But choices aren't always what you do or what you don't do. Choices are also about how you respond to things that are done to you. Things that you have no control over. My mom used to tell me all the time, Adam, you can't control what others do to you. You can't control the situations that happen, but you can always control how you respond. How you respond. And it is true. This life, it is true that there's just bad things that happen. There are things that just, good things happen to bad people. That's just the world we live in. What's the fallen nature? The world is full of wrong and wrongdoers, and bad things are going to happen out of your control that you have no control over. And that's not for you to understand. That's not for you to even control. What you are to control is how do you respond to those things? Who are you going to turn to? Who are you going to allow to influence you in those moments? And Daniel saw their current situation as an opportunity to glorify God, where many others would have saw it as an opportunity to complain or to compromise. He saw it as an opportunity to glorify God. He saw it as an opportunity for God to be glorified in this environment. I love in Daniel 12, verse 1, verse 12, it says, Daniel said, please test your servants for 10 days. Again, I love this because Daniel he's not winging it here. He's drawing from a well of past victories. He's drawing from a relationship that he's already established with God. The only time I'm ever going to ask you to test me on something is when I'm confident the answer. I'm never going to ask you to test me on something I know nothing about, because that would just make me look foolish. And so Daniel is sitting here. He's like, test me. Test your servants, because I'm confident that the God that I serve, he's going to come through, because we have built this relationship in the past. We have built this relationship. I know who he is. I know the God that I serve, and I know who I am with him. So test me in this. See, there's some really cool things about and features about Daniel that is his proposal as he highlighted the depths of his character. He was really cool in how he spoke. He didn't demand anything. He simply made a request. He was obedient in following the chain of command. His request was reasonable. His test was over a period of 10 days and didn't require preparation of unusual food. It was easy to evaluate. He simply the guard simply eyeballed the four versus the others and drew his own conclusion. See, the character of Daniel was revealed in how he spoke to the guard and how he responded in the face of adversity. See, there's one thing really neat about this is that when we are faced in the depths of despair, when we find ourselves in the valley of the shadow of death and we don't know what's going to happen next, it's so important that we do not lose ourselves. It's so important that we don't go all crazy, that we forget who we are, that we forget whose we are, that we forget who God is. So many times I see people and they just make the situation just gets amplified because they lose themselves. They lose their bearing, they lose their anchor. We understand this world is tough, but don't go flying off the deck. Stay grounded and trust that God's in control. It's important that if you cannot see clearly looking forward, if you don't know how you're going to get through it by looking forward, then look back and draw from the well of past victories. If you're so lost in the fog of doubt or disappointment or hurt or death or confusion or uncertainty, and you don't know how God is going to pull you through it, you don't see what's going to happen tomorrow, don't look forward. Look backwards and see how God has remained faithful, how God was faithful, how God brought you through it. Because the God we serve, he says he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he said he's already gone before us. He's already overcome the world. And so we can hold him to that promise that he will bring us through. Don't lose yourself in the mix. If you're here and you're you're just beginning this journey and you say, I don't have a story, I don't have a well of past victories with God, we're just new in this journey, then open the Bible because the Bible is full of victories. It's full of God has went into a hopeless situation and brought hope. Talk to somebody in this church. Read stories that are in the loop. That's why stories are so important. Showing what God is doing in your life, telling people how good God is, brings hope and faith to others. The Bible says that we are overcomers by the blood of the Lamb, but also by the word of our testimony. As we tell our stories of how good God is, it brings encouragement to the body. It brings encouragement to other believers. It brings encouragement to us as we find ourselves locked in these seasons where we are uncertain and we are full of doubt. So share your stories. The lifestyle of choices that Daniel made prior to Babylon developed within him a character of unshakable conviction, a conviction that would not lend himself to compromise in the face of adversity. See, with this unshakable conviction, this holy daring, and this delicate finesse of courtesy, Daniel and his companions were given the extraordinary gifts of wisdom and knowledge and insight. And their character was revealed to those that they served. Their character was revealed. And the third principle we can draw from this, which is probably the most hopeful principle, is that God is not looking for influential people he can make faithful, but he is looking for faithful people he can make influential. God is not looking for influential people he can make faithful, but he's looking for faithful people he can make influential. I believe with all my heart that God wants to use his church to transform this city. I believe with all my heart that God wants to use his church to transform this nation, this world, and our workplaces, our neighborhoods. I believe he wants to use his church. His church is the hope for the world. But he's not looking for influential people. He's looking for faithful people. There was nothing influential about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's nothing influential about Daniel. They were slaves. They were in the dungeons. They were prisoners. They were captives. There's nothing influential about them. But their faithfulness, because of their faithfulness, God elevated them to a place of influence in the most powerful kingdom in the known world. Their faithfulness. Because they didn't lose sight of whose they were. I love this in verse 17. It says, to those four young men, God gave knowledge and understanding in all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. And at the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them and found no one equal. So they entered into the king's service. And in every matter which the king questioned, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. So here's the principle related to this, is that faith and obedience are always married to God's promise and provision. Faith and obedience are always married to God's promise and provision. Our continued obedience in the seemingly small and insignificant things in life open the door for God to use them supernaturally, for God to show us just how more than enough he really is. When all else fails and you don't know what to do, just do what God tells you to do. When all else fails and you don't know what's happening, just be faithful. Just be faithful. Don't divert from the plan. You know what happens? Sometimes you get lost and you just start, I'm going to make my own way. I'm going to just follow the plan, stay to the plan. Don't divert from the plan. Be faithful and obedient. How is it that these 4 Hebrew boys, far away from the home, ripped from their families, placed in prison, and held captive for 3 years, gained the ear, the influence, and respect of the most powerful man in the known world at the time? Is that they never lost sight of the source of their blessing. They never thought for once that our God isn't enough. They hold on to that. They hold on to that truth. They chose not to abandon the principles of God in order to gain the blessing of God. They chose not to abandon the principles of God in order to gain the blessing of God. And by developing their inward resolve, followed by a lifestyle of choices that strengthened their character, refusing to compromise, gave God the opportunity to be more than enough and gave them influence with the king. See, their consistency between belief and action, conviction and behavior, faith and obedience, gave God the opportunity for his power to be revealed in their lives. So I want to ask you the question again. How do we, as followers of Christ, in the face of fear, uncertainty, doubt, worry, how do we turn that around to believe that God is more than enough? How do we turn that around? Because we know we're going to be there. Maybe you are here today and you're in that season. You're lost in the fog. Well, you don't know. But whether you're in it today or you're going to be in it tomorrow, we all will be in those seasons of life. And how do we turn those around? The first is this: we make that firm decision, that inner resolve to stand up for what we believe. Just come to that quiet resolve that no matter what happens around here, God, you and me, we're okay. We're going to be okay. Secondly, you hold on to the truth of who God is and what he has done. If you can't see clearly looking forward, then look back and draw from the well of past victories. Read the Bible, be encouraged that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And third, continue to walk in faith and obedience and allow God to do the rest. When you don't know what to do, be faithful and be obedient. How do we know what to do? It's found in the Word. It just tells us what to do. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and love people the same. Just love. Even when you don't understand it, even when it doesn't make sense. But here's the thing, we can never abandon the principles of God in order to gain the blessings of God. If you're in a financial situation, you don't know how it's all going to work out, you can't abandon tithing. My wife and I had to work through that. That's a hard thing to do, isn't it? You don't know how you're going to pay the bills, but yet you have to honor God with your first fruits. And so you say, God, bless me help me figure out my finances. Help me, oh God, pay this bill. But yet he's saying you're not even abiding by the principles I set out for you you're not even being faithful. You're not even being obedient. We can never abandon the principles of God to gain the blessings of God. And so when you're lost in the fog, be faithful and obedient. And I guarantee you this, that when we walk in these principles, we come to that quiet resolve, remember who God is, and we walk in faith and obedience, that we will see firsthand that the God we serve is more than enough.